For centuries in Britain, children could legally marry, not secretly, not exceptionally, publicly, lawfully, and with community approval. So how did something that now feels unthinkable once seem normal, even sensible? In a parish register, age is barely mentioned. Names, dates, witnesses, that's what matters. Our composite figure today is the parish clerk, carefully copying marriages into the book, century after century. He records unions that make us pause. A girl of 12, a boy of 14. No raised eyebrows, no marginal notes, just ink, vellum, and routine, which tells us something important. This wasn't hidden behaviour. It was expected. So expected, in fact, that the law actually allowed it. Under English common law, the minimum age for marriage was startlingly low. 12 for girls, 14 for boys. These rules came from medieval canon law and survived largely unchanged for centuries. Marriage wasn't primarily about romance. It was about contracts, property, lineage, and alliances. Age mattered less than consent, and consent was understood very differently. The parish clerk doesn't ask if the couple are ready. He asks if the vows were spoken correctly, because marriage wasn't about childhood. Childhood, as we understand it, barely existed. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If children weren't seen as children, what were they seen as? For much of British history, childhood was short. People worked young, learned trades early, and entered adult roles fast. Life expectancy was lower, mortality higher, and families needed stability. Marriage offered that stability. It tied households together. It secured labour. It protected inheritance. In that context, early marriage didn't feel cruel, it felt practical. And practicality often overrides sentiment. But practicality doesn't explain everything. So whose interests did this system really serve? For wealthier families, early marriage was about control. Land, titles, dowries. These needed securing. Younger spouses were easier to guide, manage, and align with family strategy. Consent existed, but it was shaped. Pressure wasn't seen as coercion, it was guidance. The parish clerk writes down the union. The families nod approval. The law looks the other way, because marriage wasn't about individual happiness. It was about order. But what about the poor? Did the same rules apply? Among poorer families, early marriage could mean survival. Two households pooling resources. Another wage earner. Legitimacy for children in a world that punished illegitimacy harshly. This wasn't romance, it was arithmetic. And here's where we should pause. If marriage is the only safety net available, is it freedom or constraint? I'd love to know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments, because this tension runs right through Britain's social history. Still, acceptance doesn't mean comfort. Many early marriages were unhappy, exploitative, or quietly regretted. But regret wasn't a legal category. So what changed? By the 18th and 19th centuries, attitudes begin to move. Enlightenment thinking reframes childhood as a protected stage of life. Education becomes valuable. Dependency becomes something to nurture, not rush through. But the law lags behind culture. Early marriage remains legal even as it becomes increasingly uncomfortable. The parish clerk now hesitates. He still records the marriages, but the numbers drop. Discomfort arrives before reform. And when reform finally comes, it arrives quietly. The turning point isn't dramatic, it's administrative. The Marriage Act of 1753 introduces parental consent requirements for minors marrying by licence. Later reforms tighten the system further. Eventually, age limits rise. Consent becomes meaningful. Childhood gains legal recognition. Child marriage doesn't end because Britain suddenly became enlightened. It ends because the state begins to see children differently, not as small adults, but as dependents. Which brings us to the final shift. Today, child marriage feels shocking, not because human biology changed, but because moral priorities did. We now value education over alliance, autonomy over obedience, emotional readiness over economic necessity. The parish clerk's ledger becomes a historical artifact, evidence of a world where protection came second to order. And that's the moral U-turn. What once felt sensible now feels indefensible. Thanks for walking a little further down the road that made Britain with me. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that down there. And if you liked it and subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue for you to enjoy, including this one that YouTube's chosen especially for you. I think you'll like it. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.